The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, the nice lady at Cetrix just told me that the webinar has just started. So welcome, all of you out there who are attending our webinar. This is the first Friday's webinar, and we're excited to be able to bring you alums who have expertise and experience to share with other alums. So thanks all of you MassComm alums who have joined us today. We have a great lineup coming up. Let me just tell you about a couple of the presenters that are coming up. We have Nicki Hart today, of course, but let me preview a couple of other ones that we have scheduled. Next month, November 7th, we have Justin Breger, who's class of 99, and Ken Shaka, class of 91, and they're going to talk about drones for aerial photography and videography. They've been doing some cool things with their drones, and they're going to be here to talk about the technical side of that as well as legal issues surrounding the use of this tool, which is changing the way that video and films are being shot. So that's cool. And then hopefully in December, we're going to have Rayanne Short, who is now a senior campaign manager at AOL. And we're looking forward to her presentation talking about the path that led her to her current career in digital advertising. So that's December. And then looking forward to next year, the only thing I'm going to preview at this point is I think we're going to have Adam Willard, class of 2002. He's a vice president now with Fleischman Hillard Public Relations Agency in Chicago and has extensive experience in the world of professional football and PR. And if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that the NFL could use a little positive PR right now. So that's what's coming down the pipe. But today we are honored to have our very own graphics guru, Nicki Hart, who is CEO and creative director at Multi Designs. Nicki works with clients on web, print, photography, and new media projects specializing in complete marketing campaigns for authors. She's currently working with clients all over the world, and she shares design tips and tutorials through her Digital Heart Studios' latest venture, Design Like a Pro, on YouTube, and it's Toots Plus. Is that how you say that? Toots Plus?
Tuts.
Tuts. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had to learn that Plus. Too. I said it wrong.
Anyway, her BFA in art is from CSU-Pueblo, and her minor is in MassComm, and she's from the class of 2007. So welcome. I'm going to turn it over to Nicki and let her run with it for the presentation. And then I'll be back at the end of that to help facilitate some Q&A time. So thanks, Nicki.
Hey, thank you. Hey, everyone. So excited to be the first to offer this and have a conversation about graphic design. This is something that I absolutely have a passion for. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. My business is 7 years old, and I actually started it while at CSU-Pueblo as an opportunity to get some experience while going to school and to see if it was something that I enjoyed doing all day, every day. Turns out I did, so that's why I'm here today. So my goal with this presentation is to share some tips with you of how to talk to a graphic designer, basically walk you through our process as creatives so you can understand where we're coming from in projects, followed by some language barriers that happen. Whenever you're in a technical field, you always have that jargon that you don't quite understand. So I'll share some of those with you just so you can better understand what we're talking about, and then sort of wrap it up with some examples as well so you can kind of see a little bit from my portfolio, but also just get a whole idea of how we operate and how we work. And then after that, I want to open it up to some Q&A with you guys, so if you have specific questions or need more information, we'll take it from there. So we're going to start here. And here we go. Okay, so how to talk to a graphic designer. I broke this out into 3 basic steps. Basically, I want to talk about what it is that we do, because what I have found is that graphic designers, we dabble in a lot of different things. I'm sort of an all-arounder, which means that I design in a lot of different platforms and a lot of different formats. So the best way to break this down so you can understand what a graphic designer is to look at it from 2 different perspectives. And of course, I have to share with you my favorite Dilbert comics, because he breaks it down perfectly in my mind. I actually had this up in my office forever because it's just something that I laugh at. But it's funny because really graphic designers, we can laugh at ourselves because of the way that we are and so particular about how things are. But also it is just relatively entertaining to talk to different people and see how they interpret what graphic design actually is. And here we see that to put a logo into just a rectangle is not a solution for the graphic designer, and he's way, way sad. And I laugh at this because a lot of times I get this solution where we're just going to wrap our designs in a square. But that being said, there's a lot of components to graphic design, and so the first one is print design. This is what I do all the time. So print design is anything that you see printed. So that means that we're going to see magazine ads, we're going to see magazines, publications, invitations, you name it. That's basically what I work on day to day in print design. And this is where we fall most of the time for graphic design. People think of graphic design as print design. So this is the most common. This is why I share this with you. When you think graphic design, this is it. But because of technology, we've greatly changed the way that graphic design applies. It's not just in a print world. And in the last few years, I've gone really into web design and development and apps and social media and using the online platform as this opportunity to design. And what ends up happening in smaller organizations, you're going to find graphic designers who are multi-talented in online and offline applications. And in large organizations, you're going to find it where people are very specialized in print design, in web development, and web design. Now, in my case, when I talk about web design, I'm actually talking about designing the actual layout, the actual graphics, but also the behind-the-scenes code that makes websites function. More often than not, though, graphic designers are going to live in the design world. They don't venture into the coding and the functionality side. Usually there's a team effort there. So it just depends on who you're working with and what their background is in whether or not they're going to have the complete skill set to go on both sides, or they're just going to focus in the design area. So that's just a very brief look at what graphic designers do, how they're broken out. There's a lot more in depth to this where just looking at the top level, but really we could go into lettering and artists who illustrate and any of the sort. So graphic design is definitely multifaceted and very creative and very fun because of that. So how do they operate? Think like a designer. This I share with you because we do operate sort of in a very creative, very fun world. And a lot of times, if you're coming at it from a different perspective, if you're coming at it from a strictly marketing perspective or a business perspective or a financial perspective, you may not always understand what your designers are talking about and how they think. So if you can dive into their brain a little bit, it'll help you when you're in those meetings to go, oh, I understand this. I can wrap my head around this and really make this so much more successful as a project. So the first thing is the designer process, and this process is my little secret for business success overall. So it's not just a designer's perspective, but it works very well for designers at the same time. And this is the three-step breakdown of pretty much any creative, any artist, any designer, anybody out there, even business CEOs fall into this category. But basically we're talking about creativity, innovation, and execution. So this is the three-step process that I work on regardless of the project, regardless of how simple the project. So we're talking about creativity first and foremost. That's the fun stage, the stage where ideas are happening. We're sketching, we're trying to figure out how we're going to lay out a specific project. For example, if it's a print ad, we're looking at how we're going to lay this out, how it's going to talk to the viewer. All of these fun things at the onset is that creativity stage. After that, we move into the innovation stage where we're really thinking about, okay, we've got all these cool ideas, now how are we actually going to make this happen into something? So from there, we innovate. We apply our creative thoughts into the project, and then we execute it, meaning that we follow through, we create the final product, and we use the tools that we need to do that. And nowadays it's mostly digital, so we're talking about Photoshop, for example, as a tool to execute our vision. So knowing this, you can look and see, oh, okay, so these are the 3 stages that a designer might go through throughout the entire project. Again, this is actually really cool because you can use this beyond just designers, but this gives you an insight into those 3 steps of how we operate. And then maybe you can figure out where you fit. You may not fit into all 3 of these. You may be in the final stage, you may be in the fun creative idea stage, or you might be helping the designer execute the entire project. So regardless of where you fit, you kind of now understand, oh, it's a mix of these 3 things, and this is how we operate. From there, we talk a little bit more about speak like a designer. This was something that I went through, those typical jargon words that are kind of specific to designers and creatives, and we're going to talk about what those are and explain those a little bit more. And this really is just going to help you get on the same page, understand a little bit more, so when words are flying around the conversation, you're a little bit more in tune to what those mean, and you can also integrate a little bit better with the process because you understand that. And again, this is true of virtually any technical field. I find this in web design especially because it is really its own language, but really specific careers in finance, in law, in the medical world, all have special languages that unless you're in it day to day, you don't really understand what they are. So to start with, this is what we're going to break down briefly, and these are the top words that I use all the time. Some of them are a little bit more self-explanatory than others. My favorite is the logo design versus branding that we're going to talk about because we interchange those. And what you're going to find is part of the confusion is actually in the fact that we interchange words incorrectly with graphic design, and I actually do this as well. So knowing the actual definition of this and how they're applied in design will help you talk to your graphic designer a little better. You're going to understand the language that we use. So first off, we start with file formats. This one happens when I work with clients and I need, for example, a logo. This happens all the time with logos. And I need a logo that I can apply to any sort of project, whether it's print or web. Most of the time, people will send me a JPEG that has a white background around it. And while that's fine, it's the least successful as far as getting that logo represented in the way that I want. Mostly, I don't want the background, first of all. I also want a format that I can scale at any size. So this is where raster and vector come into play here. Raster graphics are what you are most familiar with, what most of us use on a daily basis. This is your traditional photograph. This is your traditional graphic that is supplied to you via, more often than not, a JPEG. So whenever you're taking a photo on your phone or someone's sending you something, more than likely you're getting a raster graphic. This is a compressed version, which means that you're losing quality in this graphic. And you can have highly quality graphics that are raster, but at the end of the day, they are going to be lost here. That's why you can see in the example that it's a little blurry, because you can use that, and when you scale it, you will lose the quality of your graphic. And this is why we see this typically in photographs and typically in photorealistic graphics. Now, when we're looking at vector graphics, they're very limited in use because you can scale these graphics to any size. This is where logos are king, and this is why logos that are generated as vector graphics are so important, because we can scale that to any size and you don't lose quality. One of the best examples that you will be familiar with in your day-to-day life is typefaces and text. Text is an example of a vector graphic because you can scale that in your Word document, in your email. You can scale that typeface to any size and you don't see a blurry edge to that. So that is a vector file meant for that very purpose. It's very flat, there's not as many details in vector graphics, and they're not photorealistic. So when you're working with these two types of graphics, more often than not it will be the raster, but if somebody's looking for a logo and they say, can I get a vector version of that, that's what that means. They're looking for a file that they can scale to any size. And one of the key deciding factors in this is the actual file format that your image is saved under, and that's an EPS. Basically, it's an Illustrator file. It's specific to the software program, but when you're looking through your assets and all of your documents that you may have on your computer hard drive, .eps is what you're looking for in order to verify that that's a vector file that your designer can then scale accordingly. If it's a PDF or a JPEG or a GIF or a PNG, you will run into quality loss with all of those formats. They're usually compressed. So if you're looking for a logo, that's not ideal. Now, designers can make it work, but this just gives you an idea of how those are separated. Next up, color models. This is another one that I run into. Actually, designers get this mixed up a lot, so I also teach graphic design, and this is a question that I get asked a lot with people moving between the web world and the print world because the colors are represented differently. The best way to explain the difference is that RGB pertains to light. We're talking about red, green, and blue. You see that on electronic screens. So what you're seeing with this presentation is using RGB colors to represent that. It's done through the screen. The screen uses light to use colors and create the colors across a very wide spectrum, and that's why you're seeing the colors represented the way they are on your screen. And because of that, they're usually richer. They look much better. I can't tell you how many times I printed something and it looked way better on the screen because of the light representing it. So screens, websites, anything electronic is going to be produced in RGB format. Now, if you're going to print something, meaning that you're printing an ad or you're printing a poster or an invitation, anything that's actually going through a printer is going to be CMYK. These are actual pigments of ink. So we're not talking about light when it comes to print. We're talking about actual ink. And printers use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black to create all of the colors that you need for your print item. And because of that, the spectrum is actually smaller. It's a little bit duller, and that's why everything looks better on the screen because of the light coming behind it. But what ends up happening is we use these four colors to basically create anything that we need. And so when you're working in the print world, you use CMYK. When you're working in the online world, you use RGB. That's the simplest breakdown. This is one that I throw in here because we actually use this incorrectly. And I say we because we all do it. I do it and everybody else does it. And this is the difference between DPI and PPI. We usually say DPI. We want that photo in 300 DPI, when actually we mean PPI. So here's the key difference. Dots per inch is really only referring to your printer. And when I say printer, I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about your actual printer that you would use on your at home, that you have your LaserJet or your inkjet that you have at home uses DPI. This basically is the dots creating the image. So the higher the DPI, the more fine-tuned your image can be, the better looking your image can be. That's really all DPI means, and we use it all the time to talk about the quality of an image, when really we mean PPI, pixels per inch. That actually affects the quality of your image, and this is important because when you're creating assets or you need to get something to your designer, whether it be a photo or a logo or anything like that, the smaller the image, the harder it is to get a high quality version of that because you have fewer pixels as part of your image. So 72 DPI, or see, I just did it again. It happens. It's so easy. 72 PPI is actually web format. That's what we use on the web. So it's a smaller pixel ratio. It creates a smaller file, and it's better to use on the web. Where 300 PPI is what's common for photographs and high quality images to create a strong, high quality, great color, no pixelization image. All the time I tell people, you can always start with something larger and go smaller, but you can't go smaller and create something larger without losing quality. This happens all the time with getting assets from people and not quite understanding how this pixel works, and that's why this happens. So understanding the two and understanding that people are going to use them incorrectly, that's okay, it happens. But it does affect the quality of your image, and that's why if a designer says, hey, I need a 300 PPI image, they want something that's high quality, and you can't take a 72 PPI image and just automatically make it 300 without losing quality. This is another one that gets interchanged quite a lot. I do the same thing. I make mistakes with this. This is the difference between typeface and font. Now, a typeface is the actual design created by a typographer or type designer. So examples of this is Arial, Times New Roman, Helvetica. When you actually say, I want to use fill-in-the-blank font, that is a typeface. It's a family of fonts. More often than not, people just use the word font. They rarely say typeface. And when they say font, the actual meaning of font is what you're using out of that typeface to create a font. So an example is Arial in 32-point bold. That's a font. And in this example, that actually is Arial in 32-point bold. So when you break out your typeface into the size, into the style, that's when you're talking about a font. And often you're going to hear designers and other people say, what font did you use? When really they mean, what typeface did you use? And again, this is just so you can understand when you hear things, even if it's incorrect, you now understand really what the meaning is and how these break out and the differences between them. And by the way, type designers is another form of graphic design where people literally design typefaces. So all of those creative typefaces that you see out there are created by type designers specifically. This is my fun explanation between logo design versus branding. This is, again, something that is used incorrectly, and I will set the record straight here of the correct use of the word logo versus branding. Most people say branding as a whole, and when they say branding, they're actually looking at a logo. So they're using branding to describe a logo. But really, the logo is a graphic representation. It's the physical, visual of your brand. So it's what represents your brand. And a brand is something much different. So here we have examples of logos, visual representations of a brand in a variety of different industries, in a variety of different formats. We have highly illustrated, highly simple, with the Wix example, just a signature. We have the tailgating and Rev that are a little bit more graphical. We've got some intense illustration going on with 5th and Main. And then we have a flat illustration going on with Pueblo County Park. So all of these represent actual logos. Now the branding behind all of these is quite different. There is no visual tied to the actual brand. And the best way to describe what a brand is from the founder of Amazon when he said, your brand is what people say about you when you aren't in the room. That is the best way to explain the difference between a logo and a brand. So basically your brand is not a physical thing. It is a perception. It's what people think about your business, think about you, and so forth. So a logo supposedly represents that, what you want people to think about your business. But think about this. Some of the top brands out there, when you see their logo, you think about what you perceive them to be. So the logo triggers the brand and what you think about that. So that's the big thing with graphic designers. When we're designing logos, but we also take into account what this logo is supposed to represent for the brand. Bleeds is a fun one because it's such a fun word, and people who are not familiar with bleeds, really, it's funny to see their reaction. And really all bleeds are is it's another graphic term that we use all the time to decide whether or not we're going to have something printed all the way to the edge or get a white border around it. An example of this is when you're printing something on your home printer, you usually get a white border around it. You're not printing edge to edge. Now, newer technology allows you to print edge to edge, but most of the time you're just printing it with a white border. Now, when you're working on a design end, you can get things looking a lot nicer by taking into account bleeds, and all that means is the graphic is going all the way to the edge. And an example of this is with posters. If you have your traditional 11 by 17 poster, that's the final size that you are hanging up, 11 by 17. So your designer is going to add a bleed to that, typically 1/4 of an inch on the width and the height. So our document would be 11¼ by 17¼ and the printer now has room to trim down, which avoids that white border. It's a cleaner look, it's more professional, and it looks really nice for posters and large format items like that. But pretty much anything that's printed has the option to have a bleed or not. By the way, bleeds do add to the overall cost of your project. So if you are on the financial end of things and looking at cost and design, bleeds do. It's not tremendous, but it is something to consider. So a lot of times when I design things, I will look at that for cost, and if I don't need a bleed, I will avoid it simply because it is cheaper. So all of that comes into play overall between your relationship with the project and the designer and the budget as well. So that is just a quick look at how to talk to your designer, some of the jargon we use incorrectly, and now you kind of have that understanding of some of those key things. Again, there's a lot more. There's definitely a lot more when you dive into the web world. That is a whole other conversation. But those are some tips and some words that we use day to day that now you kind of understand the meaning behind them and understand what we're talking about when we say, what do you need for your bleed, and you don't think something really gruesome. Now we're going to talk about working together. The reason it's structured like this is because now you sort of know the language that we're using behind the scenes. You've also seen what we do and how we do it. So now how do we combine that to work together as a team in our environment? The cool part about this is there's really only 2 steps, and there's really only one thing that you need to know about your graphic designer and who you're working with, and the big thing is that really we are problem solvers. I use the phrase all the time that I feel like when I'm designing something for a client, it's a giant puzzle that I'm just trying to put together, and that is the case for virtually any project that I work on. It is really a problem-solution situation, and we basically solve the problem through the way that we design the finished project. And what you need to know is just how to communicate with your designer to get what you see. The cool thing is really we have graphic designers, but I feel like all of us have this artistic ability, and we all have this language. We all can communicate visual things. Some of us just do it better than others, and really everybody can be part of this conversation. So the first thing that you need to understand is that we are problem solvers, so present us with a problem. Our project is a problem to solve, and the first step is to communicate the generalities first, meaning that you know what you want designed, and so you want to communicate that. And the example is to do a print brochure. So if you need something printed and you want it to be a brochure, and you want it around letter size. So you know what it is, you know the size, you know that you want it in full color, and you know that you want anywhere from 8 to 16 pages worth of content. This is something that you can figure out without knowing too much about graphic design. You know what you want for your project. So you start there. Now, to give you the insight into how your designer will interpret that, this is how we interpret that. You present us with the problem being that you need a brochure designed, and you've given us specifics, meaning that this brochure is going to be printed. We know that it's going to be color. That does change things because knowing that it's color means that I don't need to be specific about using black and white or picking just one color. We have the full spectrum of colors to use here. You've also limited me to 8 to 16 pages worth of content, but you've given me a window of 8 to 16, meaning that we can go with 8, we can go with 12, or we can go with 16. So we know that there might be some flexibility there. So that's the first step. Now we're on the same page. The next step is to communicate your business objectives. This is one area that is seldom communicated to me from my clients, and it is really what the objective of this brochure or project is. This is a long area, so I only give 2 examples here, but this is something that you can use a lot more. And really, you just communicate to your designer, we need this brochure to reinforce our brand. Or we want this brochure to drive traffic to our stores. Or we want this to increase our online sales. We want to expand our Facebook followers, or we want to get some more engagement on Twitter. You name it, there's a lot of different business objectives. But if you've explained to me what you generally want for your brochure, and then you explain to me why this brochure is going to exist, problem, solution, it's a perfect thing. And the cool thing is you can talk to your designer, because really we're problem solvers, but we also can communicate back to you. And especially in my case, because marketing is an overall umbrella for what I do. I'm a creative artist that designs and creates solutions, but I also will always tie marketing back into it. So I can talk to you about how to reinforce your brand, or how to drive traffic, and how this brochure is going to help you with that. So that conversation can really help out. And then once you've communicated that, it's up to you to decide how to make this design work. And to do that, you need to know what design is. And this is something that I am sort of trailblazing behind, because it's something that people get or they don't get. And the number one thing is good design is functional, and it's also extremely important. There is a difference between good design that is functional and design that is not functional. And really what this needs to do is it needs to serve a purpose, and good design is going to extend your brand. It's going to create trust in your customer. This happens a lot. I will give you an example. I recently did a media kit for an archery competition, and this individual was looking to get sponsorships. And he has seen the regular sponsor kits that are thrown together, done really, really fast in Word, and he's handed those out, and then he handed these out. And he actually came back to me and said that the sponsors are just businesses, people that he's reaching out to for potential sponsorship of his event. He came back with feedback that it created a trust that he had a better media kit that was completely branded to look like his business, what he wanted it to look like. It made him look legit. And that is really what good design should do for any business or anyone who needs something designed. It makes you look legit, it makes you look professional, and it creates that consumer trust because you have something very nice. And a lot of this happens internally and how people perceive things. So that's really what's going on with design. And it also enhances your service through clean and clear communication, and it just makes that user experience so much better with whatever it is that you're offering. So out of all of this, that's really what good design does. It's purely functional, but it also serves to better your business and better your brand beyond just, oh, it's pretty, oh, it looks nice. So on the surface, that's what we see, but really there's all this going on behind the scenes, and that's what designers do. That's our goal. That's what we're working towards. Now you're going to work the flow a little bit. So with these are tips for you in your next project so that you now have the language, you know how we work, you know our process, you've seen some examples, and now we have 8 tips here that's going to get you working the flow with your next project, whatever it may be. And the first one, you do want to be realistic about time frames. I will say everything needs to happen immediately, like yesterday, but good design does take time. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be an extended time. There are the differences between a designer who is efficient and can move quickly, but also is taking the required time to do a good job, and also somebody who really is just like dragging and not very good at managing their time. But you do want to be realistic with your time frame when you're working with any creative to make sure that you have enough time to get something done. Also provide examples. I ask this all the time. When people come to me and they're like, hey, we need a new logo, I'm like, great. What logos do you like out there? What brochures do you like out there? What websites do you like? It's not to create an exact copy, but designers, we're problem solvers, so we're a little bit investigating what it is that you like so that I can create something for you that matches that. And examples are a great way to do that. I can see exactly what you're drawn to and what you like. And then I can design accordingly, and that's going to make that process much more successful, cut down on the timeline and the back and forth that happens. Also, you don't want to expect perfection on the first draft. Now, I strive for perfection on the first draft, but that rarely happens. Why? Because we're still feeling it out. We're still trying to get things done. For example, I worked on an ad. It took 2 weeks for this print ad, which is very rare, but there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of trying to get it fine-tuned, and that first draft was nowhere near what the final draft ended up being. But we needed to go through that journey. We needed that first draft to get ideas of where to go. You also want to avoid generalized feedback. Anybody who has gone through an art degree or has gone through the arts knows all about the power of critique and how to give more than the traditional, I like it, it's cool, sort of feedback, which is not very helpful. I enjoy that you like it, totally, but we need some more specific feedback. So to give you some examples that you can use, good feedback is going to allow me to adjust your design. So if there's something you generally do not like, that is totally fine, and you can communicate that by saying something like, you know, this image is just not a good representation of our brand, which leads to a question, okay, what is a good representation of your brand? And they may say, okay, we need photos of people because we connect with people. We need photos of our product because people need to see how to use the product. So all of that feedback, the more specific you get, the better it's going to be for your designer to go, oh, okay, this is what I need to do. And you can really fine-tune that feedback into color and font choice as well. There's been times, because as a designer, I lean more modern, clean. You can tell from this entire presentation, the actual look of the presentation, where I lean as far as my design goes. But sometimes I need to alter that as a designer. It's not all about me and what I like. So if I need to change up the typefaces that I'm using and the colors that I'm using because my brand is that I'm working for is more traditional, then I need to accommodate that. And your feedback may lead me down that road as well. The components of design, if you know the overall components, these are areas that will help you with your feedback, but also understand what makes up your overall design that you look at every single day. We're consumers of media, no doubt. Those items consist of color, consist of fonts and typefaces, consist of images, and then we're also the overall composition and layout, and then the overall aesthetic. Now, the aesthetic is super important. That's how we feel about it. One of the best advice I can give you when you're working in any sort of advertising or marketing and you're working in a team designing something is to consider who is going to look at this and who it's for. I had a recent situation where I had feedback from a lot of people, none of which were actual demographic for this product. So their feedback was completely invalid because it didn't really fit with who I was going after with the design and who the client was going after. So while their feedback was nice to listen to and had some valid points, they weren't the demographic, so it really wasn't going to help the design to take their feedback into consideration. So that's something to consider. The other thing to consider is that everybody on your team may not be your demographic. So if you live in a silo where pretty much you have 5 people all the time looking at the same stuff and offering feedback, not going to be as effective as when you take that outside of your group and get feedback from other sources, primarily those who are going to buy your product, attend your event, and so forth. You also want to loosen the reins a bit. Don't be too controlling. I can tell you from experience in my own personal ways that graphic designers can be a little controlling too. So we like our visions, we like our artwork, but really both sides need to give, be open. Don't take it so personally, you know, be open to suggestions and feedback and work that into the design. That really helps everybody when you let that go. Yes, it is very difficult to do so. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions. I love it when people ask me questions and want to get involved in the actual process and learn more about it. You know, why is this here? Why did you choose that color? Is there a way that we can improve the way people are going to perceive this? And is there other ways that we can use this? Most of the time I'm taking designs and using it in a lot of different ways. It may start with a poster, but then before you know it, we have a website. So asking those questions is going to lead to further project success down the line. And this one is also hard, but know when to say when. you can work a design to death and beyond and like resurrect it and kill it again. Really, you need to know when to say when, and that just means that you're looking at it, you go through those basics with your designer will give input too. We do know when to say when for the most part. Sometimes we will keep going, but we'll know when we've reached the goal of the project and when enough is enough and we really can't take it any further without damaging it even more. So these tips are going to help you with your workflow. The cool part again is it may not be beneficial only in design. You may be able to use this in a lot of different ways. So these tips just help build those relationships and make it that much better. All right, so that is the end of the tips that I have. So now I'm excited because now I hope you guys have some questions. Feel free to ask away, and then I will answer those for you. And if you have anything outside of this in design in general or anything that you just need an answer to, now is the time to ask away.
Hey, Nikki, can you hear me?
You can.
Super. I want to know what you think about Comic Sans.
You know what? Papyrus is even worse. Even worse.
Oh, Papyrus? I've used that one before. Now I feel bad. I've used it.
I know. You know what? Here's my thought about font use and typeface use. There's a role for all of it. So if it fits your project, go for it. I will say there are fonts I stay away from, though, and typefaces I stay away from because of that. But right. I have not used Comic Sans, and there's just those I don't use. I actually delete them. But I can see Comic Sans being used in a kid, you know, in a light-hearted design. So it's just up to the project.
Right. Hey, we do have one question, and I hope other people are either going to type one out for you or raise your hand, or if they have a microphone, I think they can chime in. I'm not sure. We'll have to have somebody test that to see if they can just unmute their mic and ask a question that way. But let me just refer you to the one that was typed out. Someone asked, what's your biggest pet peeve from a customer? What gets you going? I want to know the answer to that one as well.
Ooh, okay, so this one, I have two. One is like a technique. It's a break between the language, and one is just something I experience on a day-to-day. My biggest pet peeve is when my clients don't trust me. Fortunately, I work with awesome ones, but I've had experiences where that trust isn't there, and it really is a hindrance to the project overall, and it's a huge pet peeve because if you're going to work with somebody in graphic design, I say it's just like going to a doctor. You go to them specifically for what they know, and so you want to trust that and work together. The other one, and this is funny, it's not so serious, but when I'm asking somebody for a font, so example, if I need a logo or I'm like, hey, what font did you specifically use for that? They have typed it out in a Word document and then sent me the Word document. So not realizing that font doesn't come through like that, like it's installed on the machine. So there's a problem with the technology back and forth and understanding that. So right. The list can go on.
Do we still have to embed fonts in projects when we take them to the printer? Is that still?
You do. You know, I use a lot of local printers, and this is very dependent on who you use locally, but local printers don't have as, you know, they get better and better, but I always embed those and outline them because you just never know if your printer's going to have that font. They have a huge database, but you just never know. So it's a security blanket for me to embed it.
There's another question. Do you see the questions that are being typed out?
I don't. It's all blank. I know there's 17 of you out there, yay, but I don't see anything back.
Well, there was another question, and that is, what is the jargon term slug referring to?
Okay, you know, that's a good question. I don't use slug very much because it doesn't impact me, but it's actually that space between your margins, so it just gives a little extra padding. I never really use it because I just have enough white space around my designs to not need it, but it's just that little extra padding that you can put in there if you need to. Publications would use that a lot just to give you that for your spine, for example, just to avoid having stuff come across. So. It's a fun word, though, right?
Yeah, I had an immediate picture of those things on the sidewalk. But,
yeah, exactly.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions. Let me encourage you all,
if anyone thinks they can try or wants to try to ask one on your microphone, feel free to.
Yeah, because I think everybody's in listening mode, but is there a way to
Wow.
take them out of listening mode?
Well, I think they can unmute themselves, but if not, I'm going to unmute Letitia. I'm going to put her on the spot and see if she's there and see if she can talk.
Is that for me?
Oh, hey! Did I have to unmute you, or could you have unmuted yourself?
I think you could have heard me. I mean, I think I could have just started talking, but I was trying to be quiet.
Well, I just clicked on the unmute, so I know that you work with students who work in design. So do you have any?
So I kind of have a question that I don't know if it's so relevant to this, but sometimes you'll work with people who really like Publisher. What do you do to, I mean, is that workable with you, or do you say, hey, I'll just take it and I'll put it in InDesign and I'll take care of it? How do you deal with the Publisher fans out there?
I know, and this is true of a lot. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Though, especially for me, is that I don't have it, so I actually can't access the file. So worst case scenario, I end up having to recreate the project in InDesign and they don't know it. Now, if you have somebody who wants the Publisher file back, then that is a problem, and depending on the client, I may go out and get Publisher just to make that work. Fortunately, I really haven't had a problem with the actual file, though. Most of the time, I am creating something from scratch and giving it back to the client, and they're not using that. And if they are, they have InDesign. And where I run into problems more is the version of InDesign, because we have so many now, and downscaling back down so that they can open it in older versions is where I run into a problem sometimes. But if it becomes a Publisher thing, a lot of times I'll just try to recreate it for them so we can get the project done. But because I actually don't have Publisher. Or Quark, that's another one for InDesign. Back in the day, Quark was, that transition was a similar situation. But Quark and InDesign worked a little better together. Project and InDesign do not at all. So. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Here we go. How's that?
There we go.
Okay. We do have several more questions, so I'm going to try to get to them real quickly, and then we'll have to wrap it up. And the first is not a question; it's actually a comment from Lene. She just was really thankful for you taking the time and sharing with us, and we're so glad that we have alums out there who are interested in continuing to learn and get information. So that's just a thank you from Lene. Liz wanted to know how you handle a client who doesn't have a clear idea for their branding.
Who doesn't have a clear idea for their branding? Okay. Hey, Liz. By the way, I have to give a shout out to Liz. Liz was my primary advisor and professor, so thanks to her for where I'm at today. It started there back in the early 2000s. So when I'm working with a client who doesn't have a clear understanding of their brand, I actually have steps to help get them to talk more about their brand. So it's an actual worksheet that is very simple, but it's a questionnaire type. So if we sit down, the questions that I would ask, first and foremost, and this actually does some work behind the scenes for their marketing, but I always ask them, who is your ideal customer and who is your current customer? Most of the time they're two separate things because they've not quite gotten their ideal customer. And when they explain that to me, it really helps me to define what it is that they're looking for their brand. And then we go down into more detail about visual things too, because obviously they're going to have certain things about their business that they like. One of the cool things when people come to me in my entire office, I wish I could show you, but my computer would be hard to move, but my entire office is actually branded to look like my business. So the colors represented throughout and all of that. And so people coming for meetings in here get these ideas like, oh, this is how I can extend that and make that work. So if you're coming to me for advice, my office needs to represent that too. So we go through the worksheet, but then we also have real examples that I can share with how to build that successful brand for people who aren't sure. And I can tell you there are really long-term brands, 40 years or more, that don't have a clear idea really of what their brand is. So it's definitely a challenge, but something you can build on all the time.
Cool. Hey, 2 more questions. One was, when you're designing for the web, how many different platforms do you test on?
Oh yeah, this is hard. Like, technology is so expensive. I have to have it all. Now I don't have an Android though, but I do have a PC and a Mac for this very reason, so I can test out on both platforms because they actually render it differently. I have mobile device that I can test on, and now that the iPhone 6 came out, there's actually different sizes now. So now I have both. And then I have an iPad. So all of those web solutions I can try out for size to see how it's rendering, how it's acting, and if I need to make any adjustments for one over the other. So that is one thing.
And different web browsers as well. So.
Exactly. So I have all of the web browsers. For the longest time I had IE6 just to see how it looked, but now I don't even think you can get it anymore. But it's important because we all have different browsers and all that, so it's kind of a process to make sure it's looking the right way across everything.
Cool. Hey, one more question. It's a legal question. Who is responsible for copyright concerns, the designer or the client?
This is such a great question. I'm glad this was asked. So I go back and forth. I've actually gotten into a few arguments with other designers about this because this is not something that is really talked about. This is how I look at copyright. When a client comes to me and asks me to design anything, they retain the copyright for that project. They have hired you to do that. They're the business. Their website is their asset. Now, the actual creativity behind it, the design, I can reuse that as a designer. So that I actually have my own copyright as the designer. But that finished project in its entirety belongs to the business in my mind, and that business then needs to understand that. And I've actually gone through a lot with websites because of that. They don't understand the asset and that they need to own that at the end of the day, and that's why my rates, it's built in. So you're getting that copyright, so my rates are built in to reflect that.
If they bring you a piece of art or something that they want you to incorporate and it doesn't belong to them, how do you handle that?
So I will explain to them, and most of the time I will offer to get the proper assets to avoid that problem, and I will ask. And photography is a great example of that. I just designed an ad and we had to credit all the photographers, and the photographers were great. We didn't have to pay them to license that, but we did have to credit them, so we worked it out with them. And businesses is a big one. It's so easy to pull images from all sorts of different sources, but really I will work with that. So if you have a designer who's aware of copyright law a little bit and can help you with that, that's an awesome relationship. But if not, as a business, you should brush up on it a little bit, get familiar with who owns what and how that works and what you can and can't use, and make sure that you own whatever it is that's incorporated into your designs.
Well, fantastic. Nicki, thank you so much for sharing with us and for your expertise. And just a plug, Multi-Designs, I'm sure they can look you up on the web and find how to get in contact with you. Oh, speaking of which, I think we have a project we're working on. You said realistic time frame. How are we doing with our little project? Are we getting close?
We are. We're actually going to meet. I'm doing 2 things for you, and so we're going to meet very soon about both of them.
Excellent. We can take that offline. Yes. Good.
Take it off that.
No, thank you so much.
I'm cramming this weekend to get it done secretly.
Don't work over the weekend. But I do want to let all of our attendees know before you disconnect, this will be archived as a recording and available as a link and I'll send out that link soon. As soon as I know what it is, I'll send that out so that you can access it after the fact. Also, just want to remind you to, when you hear about the next webinars coming up, to sign up for those as soon as you can, and hopefully we'll be able to build on the success from today. Also, if you're not a Facebook friend with the MassCom Department of Journal Mom, please like our Facebook page so that we can keep tabs with you and announce new things coming up. That's a good place for us to stay in touch with each other. Also, I want to make a quick plug for the upcoming homecoming game on October 18th. We're going to have a special MassCom tailgating event at that game in the afternoon. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff, I believe, so it'll be over the lunch hour. Rev will be out there, Rev 89, so if you remember any of the great Rev folks, their award-winning staff will be out there as well. And if you haven't been on campus in a while and you're coming from out of town, we're also hosting some tours of our facility here at the Bureau of Communications Center for folks who would like to see our new digs. We've been in here a couple of years, but still we'd like to invite you to come by for a tour if you'd like. One last thing, our retired professor, Department Chair Jen Mullen, has something exciting coming up for the department and for alums in the fall of 2015. I don't want to give away too much, but I just want you to know that that's coming and keep an eye out for that. And until next month, and remember next month is video and photography via drones, and that's going to be Justin Greger and Tim Shaka. Until then, thanks again for being here and being great.